My name is Tamron Barker. I'm on the GovHack organising committee. It's great to have you all here. Thank you very, very much. We have an awesome weekend ahead of us. So firstly, just a few words on why it's so awesome and what we can expect. We're here because we believe that data is a resource, a valuable resource, an important resource. In particular, the enormous amounts of data that government possesses, that government has. And we believe that by bringing government closer together with the community, bringing it into closer reach with its citizens, we can do something pretty awesome with this resource. So this weekend is about the government actually leading by example, seeking new ways to identify innovative outcomes, innovative ways of delivering its services and ways of reducing costs. This weekend is about collaboration, it's about building teams, it's about showcasing skills, it's about challenging those skills, and it's about being creative. This weekend is also about, as Zane already alluded to, about finding new pathways to innovative outcomes. Outcomes that could perhaps trigger new business opportunities. And it's about winning prizes. So you've heard already $85,000 on the table for our team, so it's a healthy competition, I dare you. But more than that, more than winning prizes, it's about a bigger vision. It's about a movement towards an open data government platform. And I think that's why we're all here. So I'm not going to take much time at all. Without further ado, I'd actually like to hand over to Paul Miles. Where is Paul? There you are. Paul is the... Oh, forgive me, Paul, sorry. Just a very important thing. On behalf of the organising committee, of course, at the very outset, we would like to thank those of our sponsors who have actually brought all of this together and helped us to facilitate this. The Western Australian State Government being the major one, the primary one. So thank you, Paul, for that. Sorry, I jumped the gun a little bit. Let me say also thank you. So these are our national sponsors, quite a few. And in Western Australia, so obviously it's the WA State Government. We've got IBM and Landgate, and a host of others. Thank you very, very much for your strong support in helping me to get this together. And also thanks also to our participants who are here in mass. This weekend, remember, is about you. So I'd like to actually hand over now to Paul Miles, the Parliamentary Secretary to Minister Mission, the Minister for Commerce. And at the same time in doing so, I'd like to thank again the Western Australian State Government for its strong support for GovHack. Thanks, everybody.
I thought I was standing on some dodgy pallet then for a moment. Good evening, everybody, and welcome along tonight. And can I just thank the organisers too for their support in putting this together, because it's these sort of events that will help us in government to be able to deliver some of the projects that we need to our community. The state government does advocate well on GovHack, and it's an annual weekend event. Obviously, you had it last year. This year, we've helped out a bit with providing a bit of money to help you out. The West Australian public sector comprises of 166 departments. So that's a lot of data that you guys control through and maybe provide some further community infrastructure, apps, web-based programs, anything like that to help the community in integrating with the government and or just providing more information for the community. The biggest spending agencies, you're probably all aware of, but the biggest spending agencies in the sector, and it accounts for just over $1 billion worth of money that the government spends of taxpayers' money on ICT, is health, education, the corrective services. I don't know why we spend a lot on corrective services, because that's jails. It might be the GPS ankle practice, I suppose. The Attorney General, my boss, the police, and of course Landgate, which is one of your people that are sponsoring you here today. And Landgate's one of those agencies that actually has been on the forefront of going digital and providing more and more detail to the general public. The state government's very much aware of the benefits and the challenges that you can do by applying new technologies to the data. And whilst we do have some apps out there, and I think some of you have probably seen some of them. Our Department of Wildlife has an app on frogs, if you want to go and have a look at that one, so you can see which frogs are attacking our native wildlife. We have an app that's been produced by the Department of Commerce through Consumer Protection called iRent, WA. There is an iRent, which is apparently registered to somebody in the US. Kim Haynes has one for local GP services. And these are just, you know, little apps that the general public can have and obviously help people, again, with information on what government services are available to them. One of the things also is the government has established the Directors General IT Steering Committee. Now this is fairly major through the government agencies, because at the moment some of our General Director Generals and our CEOs have just been doing their own ad hoc programming and spending quite a large sum of money on things and not sharing with other agencies. And I was actually talking to some people in planning the other day who are actually just developed a planning model for people to be able to put in and get planning applications approved more efficiently and effectively. And it turns out that we'll probably be able to save $5 million, because an agency that I'm partly responsible for, which is the Building Commissioner, is also wanting to do the same thing, but they didn't know anything about the other agency had already spent all this money developing the program. So that's the sort of thing that the Directors General should be looking at and coordinating a proper and efficient ICT. It does go on, but one of the things that I do also want to just touch on, which does concern me, and it's actually, I nearly fell off the chair last night while I was watching the TV news, is the City of Perth. I hope there's nobody here from the City of Perth. They were obviously outraged by some people in the community that wanted to rent out their car parking spaces or their garages and stuff like that. Well, I can tell you now, the state government thinks it's a great idea. And there is the guy that's actually developed that website. I don't know if he's here, but he should be congratulated on being more efficient with products around and being more out there and helping the community to be able to benefit by what's online. So good on the great work that he's done. And I do know that when I spoke to Dean Nowder about it, Dean had no objections to it. So we don't know why the Department of Transport got involved, because it's clearly a local government issue about parking, and I can't see everybody wanting to park and the City of Perth losing any funds. But with that aside, I want you to have a very good weekend, and I will be interested to see what the outcome of your brainstormings are, and I'm looking forward to it. So have a good one, and as they say, happy hacking.
Thank you very much, Paul. So I'm now delighted to hand over to Sven Blumel, who is the Western Australian Information Commissioner, who certainly knows about the value and importance of data and information. Thank you very much, Sven.
Thank you very much, Tamron, and good evening, everyone. It's great to see so many people here, and I would just like to start with a few thank yous, obviously to the organisers of GovHack for inviting me along, but also to the sponsors, because by looking at particularly, say, the state government and Landgate, at the moment, it is so hard to be able to justify sponsorship for anything. And to be able to say that this event has been chosen as something that is seen of such value, which of course it is, that it's worth sponsoring, is, I think, a fantastic achievement. So thanks to those sponsors. And also to the dataset providers. I've had a look at some of the datasets that are made available this weekend, which is just fantastic to see. And I cast my mind back to 5, 6, 7, 8 years ago, when I think that would have been almost unthinkable, apart from a few little islands across the public sector where people were ready to open up a bit and say, well, maybe we're not the only people here that can extract value from this data. Maybe someone else should also get a go. Apart from a few islands of that, there was none of that on a large scale. So this is absolutely fantastic. I think we're absolutely moving in the right direction. I'm sorry to say that I can't provide you any data sets. Even despite my title as Information Commissioner, about the only thing that I can think of that I publish is that I publish my corporate credit card statement on my website every month. Feel free to analyse that. It's incredibly boring. As far as I know, well, I hope it's boring actually. But for me, a couple of years ago, as Information Commissioner, I'm often brought into disputes about release of government credit card statements or ministers' credit card statements, and I thought, well, why don't I publish mine? I'm hoping that'll be taken up as a bit of an example by others, because what I'm doing is I'm not spending my money, I'm spending your money when I'm spending on my corporate credit card, being a public servant. So that should be open for all to see. So feel free to trawl through that, but it's very short and you will be disappointed. Now, what is an information commissioner? Some of you will of course know this, but I should say, for those of you that don't, it's nothing like an information minister. Now, an information minister is usually a position held in a repressive, non-democratic regime whose job it is to make sure that the people don't get any information. It's a bit like, it's sort of ironic in the same way that countries that have the word democratic in their name are usually anything but. So it's nothing like that. In fact, it's quite the opposite. My main role is to be an independent umpire on FOI disputes. So when someone applies to an agency or a minister for information, under freedom of information, if they don't get it, then they can ultimately come and appeal that decision to me. I'll review that and I will determine then whether the information can be properly withheld under FOI or whether it should be given out. And you'll be pleased to know that the default is that it's given out. Unless it's specifically exempt for one of the reasons that Parliament has told us are valid, like law enforcement, etc., etc., it's got to be given out. Now, there's probably still a bit of culture change that needs to happen in some parts of the public sector to make that happen a bit more, but we're well on the way. Another role I have is to basically act as an educator on FOI to both the public and to government agencies. Now, as you can imagine, I sometimes get called upon to make decisions that are perhaps not popular with government, and for that reason, I'm of course independent of government, so I'm seen as not being able to offer any favours or be partisan in any way. I can tell you it's an absolutely fun job. Events like tonight, of course, provide an opportunity to look beyond the individual disputes, the individual documents, and actually say, well, what can we do with public sector information? Now, I use that term specifically. I didn't call it government information, because again, to me, in the same way that there's no such thing as government money, there's public money, there's the people's money. In the same way, information that government and the public sector collects, uses, discloses, hopefully discloses, should only ever be done if there's a good public purpose in doing so. So therefore, it's not the government's information. Of course, I'm not talking here about the party political information, that's quite separate. But anything that's done under ministerial power, under agency, under legislation, under directives and so on, is all the people's information. Of course, sometimes there are good reasons for why it shouldn't all be given out. I, for example, should not be able to go to your local public hospital and be able to get your medical record. I think we all acknowledge that there are some limitations on that, in the same way that perhaps colourful proprietors of nightclubs and bars should not be able to go to police and get the information on when the next supplies raid is happening. So there are good reasons. My job is to make sure that unless there is a good reason, the information is actually disclosed. And I should say that before becoming a lawyer, which is my current career of choice, I worked for a company that built medical legal expert systems many years ago when that was really very, very new. And what that did is it taught me the value and power of information. Because here were systems being developed that looked at medical research over many decades, sometimes even centuries, combine that with an individual's medical information, combine that with legislation on what people's rights are, for example, for veterans or with all their widows or dependent children, and then worked out a solution that put all of those things together and supported a decision as to an individual's level of pension or support and so on. That was incredibly powerful because you could see the end result for the individuals who needed that support. But why is information so powerful? I'm sure I'm speaking to the converted here. But I've gone through and identified a couple of categories of what information, or particularly what disclosure of information, can do. And of course, one thing to do is it can end careers. We've all seen the UK government or UK MPs' expense scandals, which were disclosed. I think it caused quite a few people not to be re-elected. I'm not quite sure how that guy is who claimed public money as an expense for cleaning his moat. I think that was my favourite one. I'm hoping he's no longer in Parliament. It would be very sad if he were. But it just goes to show that that sort of information, it can end careers. Now, you can of course argue that in a case like that it should end a career, but that goes to show the power of it. It can lead to massive amounts of expensive litigation. In 2008, of course, we had the Varanus Island gas explosion, which I think many of us will recall. Absolutely devastating to parts of the state economy. And there'll still be litigation coming out of that for many years. One of the things that came out of that was a massive FOI dispute that came before me. This was basically, and this is all on the public record, of course, a law firm applied under Freedom of Information to Mines and Petroleum for the information about the inspection reports leading up to the explosion. Perhaps not surprisingly, that was fought by the operator of the island, Apache Energy, but the Department of Mines and Petroleum was actually ready to give it all out to the lawyers because they thought it's not exempt. Eventually I agreed with the department that it should be given out, but that was then appealed to the Supreme Court, which I'm pleased to say upheld my decision, and then to the Court of Appeal. Now the reason I'm saying that is that was the first time in Western Australian history that an FOI matter went all the way to the full Court of Appeal, which also confirmed the decision. But it goes to show how much was at stake. This wasn't the fight about who pays whom what money. This was the fight about getting access to the documents that may or may not show what went wrong. And it's been estimated that the value of the litigation could be anywhere between $2 and $6 billion. So you can imagine what turns over. Another example of the power of information. Information can remind us of the successes and failures of the past. In one of my other jobs, I'm one of the State Records Commissioners. We work with the State Records Office, who manage the State Archival Collection, which is an absolutely wonderful treasure of information. I don't know if any of you have ever had a chance to interact with it, but it's absolutely brilliant. And in fact, so much so that once a year there is a very prestigious award given out called the Margaret Metcalf Award for the work that someone has done, usually a written work, which makes best use of the State Archive with appropriate references. Now, that's not just there because the past is sort of interesting and titillating or whatever it might be, although it can be all of those things. It's also there because it can help us inform the decisions of today. Because quite often when a decision's being made, someone else has grappled with something similar in the past and they may have gotten it right and we can learn from that, or they may have gotten it horribly wrong and we can avoid that path. Absolutely wonderful, wonderful stuff. Of course, information can solve crimes. Information can heal. A lot of the disputes that come before me involve individuals that might be grieving, that want information about how their loved one died or what level of care they received, and often when they get it, it can help them move on. It can improve the rate of royalties. I thought this was absolutely fascinating. A couple of years ago, I was speaking with my Norwegian counterpart, and he was able to point me to some research that showed that economies that have a higher legislated degree of openness and transparency can extract higher rates of royalties from their natural resources than countries that have lower transparency, or indeed in some cases virtually no transparency, which I thought was absolutely fascinating. And of course the Norwegian economy is not all that dissimilar from the Western Australian economy in a lot of ways. And when I thought about it, my hypothesis is of course that if you're a multinational deciding where to invest your money for the next exploration and production venture, if you're investing in a place like Western Australia where you know that there is transparency, then you can be sure that you're not going to, once you've been awarded the relevant contracts or the relevant concessions, you're not going to be kicked out by someone who's delivered a bigger bag of cash to the government of the day a year later. In some other economies, of course, that's not a given. So therefore, that multinational does not have to figure in as high a risk premium when doing business in Western Australia as they do when doing business in some other jurisdictions. What that means is they can afford to pay us more royalties and still make the project add up. That's something I always remind the public service of, is that while transparency and freedom of information may seem like a cost, an impost, an annoying administrative thing, and at times it can be all of that, especially if it's handled poorly, it's also something that contributes greatly to our well-being, even the financial well-being. And in fact, the OECD consistently finds a great correlation between the nation's level of financial well-being and their level of legislated transparency. Of course, it allows us to make better decisions. Government makes decisions that have ramifications for generations and generations. It needs data and interpretation of data to do that well. Imagine building a hospital, a railway line, a freeway, without that data about population trends, about traffic flows and all of that. I'm sure it has happened, of course, and that would be a disaster. The more we can use that data, the better the quality of our decisions will be. And finally, of course, on an esoteric note, I always come back to the idea of information empowers the people. I think Abraham Lincoln said it best when he said, "Let the people know the facts and the country will be safe." And I think that is a really, really powerful statement. But how do we get value out of information? Because that's what we're here to do over this weekend. Well, I think, in my opinion, you need three things. You need the data, for a start. Now, government is really good at the data. Why? Because government has the infrastructure to gather it. Government has the legislative mandate to gather it. Take, for example, meteorological data, Bureau of Meteorology. They have an absolutely unrivaled network of weather stations, of data transmission, of access to satellite time, and all of those sorts of things. Imagine someone from the private sector coming on and trying to replicate that. It would almost certainly not be feasible, or if it were feasible, it would not be financially doable. So government's really good at data. In a lot of ways, government is best placed to collect and aggregate the data. Second thing I think you need is ideas and innovation. We're probably not so good at that. I probably have to say, having spent half my, or more than half my working life in the public sector, the private sector's got us on that one. I think on the whole, the private sector has the combination of motivation, flexibility, experience that can do that probably better than the public sector can. Now, in the past, that was an either-or thing. In other words, well, government's got the data, therefore we need to develop it. Of course, now, you're all here because we know there is a better way. And the way is, yeah, government collects the data and all of that, and then makes it available to you. And the ideas, the innovation, the spark can happen. It can happen in government too, but there's no reason to confine it to that, because I think we're selling ourselves well short. And of course, finally, we require the execution. Now, that requires planning, technical skills, project management, and so on. And again, there, between the public and the private sector, is probably a draw. I think there are very successful projects in both, and there are some stunning failures in both as well. And of course, anyone who ever thinks that the public sector is the only place where you get massive, cumbersome bureaucracies has never dealt with a large mining company. So this is where freedom of information, or freeing up information, I should say, becomes incredibly powerful. It allows us to combine the best of the two worlds, and we should be doing a lot more of that. If you just need an example of that, I'd be willing to bet that there is no one in this room who doesn't have either a smartphone or a tablet. Speak up if I've got that wrong. I'd be willing to bet that all of you have some kind of weather app on that device. And I'd be willing to bet that most of you have a weather app that's not actually from the Bureau of Meteorology. But chances are the data is from the Bureau of Meteorology, because an app developer isn't going to go and build $1 billion worth of data gathering infrastructure and weather stations. Why should they? It works. So we need to let go within limits. But there's some great work that's being done in the space, but we've got a long way to go. My key message that I want to finish on is really one for the public sector primarily, although those people from the public sector that are here are almost certainly the converted, and that is that information, unless there is a very, very good reason not to do so, should be made available. In closing, I very much look forward to seeing what kind of magic you can weave over the next 48 hours. I wish you great data sets. I wish you fast coding. I wish you the best of luck, and I wish you good coffee. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. You see, this is why they're our keynote speakers, because they get it. Right, so just handing over to our fellow organising committee member and also representative of Landgate, Keith Moss, who's going to run through some of the details of what is going to take place this weekend and what you need to know.